Welcome to the big show, ladies and gentlemen. And what we've been talking about is the ocean floor, and ultimately how the ocean floor has played a huge part in understanding how the continents have drifted over time. What we're really talking about is putting it all together by understanding what this strange word, subduction, is all about. So, let's not waste any time. Get right to it. As you remember, we've been talking about this diagram where the ocean floor has been spreading apart. Now, in this lesson, we've put the cap on it. In other words, we've added the continents on either side of the ocean. Now, we have to recognize specifically what's happening right in this circle, both circles, where the ocean crust, which is much thinner than the thicker continental crust. What happens at that collision where those two huge things crash into each other? Well, we have to understand exactly what's going on, and I want you to think about in terms of their thickness, recognizing obviously the oceanic crust much thinner. Therefore, you have to squeeze all this material in this real thin space of the oceanic crust. Therefore, it's going to be quite heavy, but also a little bit denser. So when they crash into the thicker continental crust, even though it's quite heavy in its own right because it's so very thick, it's much more dense for the oceanic crust. So it's going to slide underneath, subducting underneath. It's being pulled underneath the continental crust when they collide. Now, that's important to recognize what it's creating. So let me show you in Google Earth, and we've mentioned this before. This area right here, recognize the mid-ocean ridge, but here is the trench, and that's the landform I want you to understand. The trench is where subduction is being created. This dark blue part is the oceanic crust. This lighter blue, believe it or not, is part of the continent. Yes, here is North America. Here we are, Pennsylvania, right here. Here's New Jersey. What I want to point out, this light blue part is still part of that continental crust. So in other words, if you went out to the beach in Margate or Ocean City, New Jersey, and you walked out into the beach and out into the water, you'd have to walk many, 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 many miles to get out to the end of the continental crust. But if you could, in other words, if we could just evaporate all of the ocean's waters, we'd be walking out, and we get to this point, what we would see is this incredible cliff, just a huge drop right here, almost as if you were dropping into an abyss, into a huge hole. This huge trench, that's exactly what it's called, a trench, is very, very deep. So obviously the oceanic crust is much lower. So when you start thinking about people that go fishing out into the deep ocean, they got to get out past the oceanic crust to get into real deep waters. Now, let me spin around to the Pacific. Notice the difference. A little bit of a difference. Look how much darker it is right out here into the Pacific, the western part of the Pacific Ocean. Much deeper. That's why it's much darker in terms of here's the continental shelf. It's essentially what it's called. The continental shelf then just drops off right into this huge deep abyss. Now, you might also recognize this also looks like the Ring of Fire. Very interesting. Lots of action out here in the Pacific. So one of the deepest parts is the Marianas Trench, which I believe is somewhere around here. Here's the Marianas Trench right through here. So keep that in mind. I believe this is the trench. Anyway, it is a trench. I'm thinking this is probably the deepest trench, the Marianas Trench. All right, let's head on back. to our little diagram here. My next question then states, what does this collision create? Now, it's creating a trench, but more importantly, I also want to point out, think about the spot where they are rubbing together, the continental crust rubbing up against or into the oceanic crust. Strange as it sounds. What does it create? Well, here it is. Friction. Any Boy Scouts would know if you rub two sticks together, you're creating friction. All of a sudden, you're creating a fire. Huh, a fire. No wonder there's so many volcanoes on the boundary lines of continents. The Ring of Fire is a perfect example. This is the reason why. All of this heat is being generated by the collision of these huge masses of oceanic crust colliding into the continental crust, creating either mountains or, in some cases, very active volcanoes. Next, ladies and gentlemen, let's put the process all together. This picture I showed earlier is the entire process of the seafloor spreading, heading off into subduction. Now, we labeled this process 1 through 4, and I asked you to come up with your thoughts or your explanation of what's occurring at each spot. So number 1, we mentioned earlier, magma's erupting. Magma's erupting at the surface, comes out as lava. Pretty simple. Number 2, new lava is coming out of the mid-ocean ridge, this huge mountain range. Obviously, the valley is in between it. That's where lava is coming out. This new lava coming out of here, thus the arrows pointing in opposite direction, is forcing the ocean floor to move towards the continents. That's what I have typed right here. Now, let's take a look at step 3. Step 3 has this little red circle. What we want to recognize is the trench is being created by subduction. Subduction occurs where the dense oceanic crust sinks below, creating this trench. Now, let's think about this little red circle. It's red for a reason. What I want to point out is it's creating all of this friction. So I put it in step 4. The seafloor sinks below the continent. All this heat creates volcanoes. You can see the volcanoes right through here. And then the crust, the oceanic crust, dips down, comes in contact with a mantle where it's even warmer. It starts to melt, and it melts into magma. And then the process continues all over again. So this is a very closed process in the fact that it's just a continual process from 1 to 4 and over again. So try and understand that, ladies and gentlemen. The last thing I shared with everybody was this picture here, or 2 pictures. I asked, if I gave you this scenario, would the ocean be growing or sinking? And keep in mind, folks, we've already talked about how the Atlantic Ocean is obviously growing. What I want to point that out is, how do we know that? Well, it comes back to understanding the rate. Now, hopefully you can understand that if subduction is faster, what's happening is the ocean floor is being disintegrated faster than the sea floor can be created out here with the new lava. In picture B, what I'm saying is just the opposite. Now this lava that's coming out is coming out so fast and so much, because what I'm saying is subduction is happening a little bit slower than the rate of seafloor spreading. Well, now, if that's the case, the ocean floor is just going to keep building and building and becoming larger and larger. The ocean's getting larger in this case. So your answer for both of these, let's understand this. In B, because subduction is slower, more lava is being created, therefore more of the ocean floor is being created, the ocean is growing. If the lava is slower, but subduction is really fast, which is happening out in the Pacific, not in the Atlantic, even though I'm showing the Atlantic here, the ocean would be shrinking. So I want to mention that to everybody. Hopefully this helps everybody understand everything that's happening with subduction. So let's make sure, ladies and gentlemen, you get everything accomplished. And as always, all the best.
A world that's waiting up for me, that I call my own. Through the dark, through the door, through where no one's been before, but it feels like home. They can say it all sounds crazy. They can say I've lost my mind. I don't care, so call me crazy. We